Check, check.
Who changed the slide?
No, back. There you go.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for coming. I'm so excited to be here personally. I'm George Bey. I'm a member of the Explorers Club at EC50. By trade, I work in the jungles of Yucatan. And we're here tonight to talk about something that I think is quite interesting, which is where does exploration fit in the 21st century? What is an explorer in the 21st century? I'm joined by my colleagues, Bethanee Bemis, who's from the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, and also Lacey Flint, the archivist here at the Explorers Club. So come along with us for the next few minutes, and we're going to share some thoughts and ideas. And I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, since I am an explorer who was so generously allowed to join this institution. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I do as well. So first question is how we got here this evening to have this conversation. And it started last year, October, in the National Museum of American History at the Smithsonian. Bethanee got together with Lacey and myself, and we started talking about having a joint day at the Smithsonian where the Explorers Club brought some materials from their collection, and the Smithsonian brought out a bunch of their stuff from the collection. Teddy Roosevelt and Admiral Byrd's hat, and a really wild set of stuff. And we talked about the artifacts, and it was a wide-ranging conversation that day. Emerging from that was a discussion during the day about where exploration is and where it's headed in the 21st century, because I guess you'll all agree with me that exploration in 2025 is not what it was in 1905. And after that day, Paul Tanguy, who is a Explorers Club member, came up and said, maybe you'd like to come to New York and talk a little bit about this at the Explorers Club and continue what really is a conversation. And so although there'll be some formal parts, I am a bit, pedantic, and it's not uncommon for me to be formal. We hope to have a bit of a conversation and also to entertain your questions at the end so we could talk a little bit about this, because it's an interesting and provocative question, I think, which is what explorers are today and what exploration is today. I'm going to begin by turning it over to my colleagues, and they're going to speak to you a little bit about their institutions and what they do in the collection, and then I'll come back and kind of run you through what I'm thinking. So this is Bethanee Bemis.
Thank you, thank you.
And here's your
And I
clicker.
have a clicker, and I'm going to stick this back where it goes so I don't have to hold it. Maybe? That's good. Okay. All right, so that's at the Smithsonian, but this is the Smithsonian Castle. This is the Smithsonian Institution as you know it. It was established in 1846, and our founding and first collections were actually tied intimately to the idea of exploration. This is in part because one of the battlegrounds on which the young United States attempted to prove legitimacy to the world as a world power was that of academia, and particularly in the arena of the gentleman naturalist, as so many wealthy and powerful men in Europe styled themselves at the time. I use this one every chance I get. The Smithsonian, So the first federally funded Smithsonian scientific exhibition in the U.S. was the United States Exploring Expedition of 1838, which was colloquially known as the Wilkes Expedition for the commander, Lieutenant Charles Wilkes. The charge set forth by Congress to Wilkes was to explore the Pacific, with specimens collected being deposited with the newly formed National Institution for the Promotion of Science. They'd been granted space in the Patent Office to keep their specimens and begin a national museum collection. And once there, the specimens joined a cabinet of historical relics that included James Smithson's mineralogical cabinet, George Washington's uniform, and a Franklin printing press. There's a rendering of the Patent Office in the middle there. So expeditions that were sent out by the government and then later by the Smithsonian Institution itself continued to bring in items of both natural and anthropological interest to the scientists who helmed the early United States National Museum, which officially opened in 1881. The collections from the Patent Office were officially transferred to the Smithsonian in 1858 and formed the basis of that first museum, which shifted the focus of the Smithsonian from that of solely original research to research plus the education of a democratic populace. The collections of the Wilkes expedition were no longer just research collections, but became relics of American history, with the explorers themselves elevated alongside other great men in the American Parthenon, as represented by the Smithsonian. Then as the Smithsonian grew from one museum into the 21 that we have today, the collections of these expeditions were divvied up in ways that influenced their current interpretation. Specimens made their way largely to the Natural History Museum, where they're viewed as a continued resource for science with a hard S research. Items of anthropological value from indigenous peoples now reside at the National Museum of American Indian as appropriate, or have been given back to their indigenous owners. And items used by the men on the expeditions made their way to the American History Museum, largely in our collection of military history objects, because they were associated with the Navy. And the bulk of our official exploration collections in American history come from the Hall, Franklin, and Peary expeditions. They are collections made up largely of relics saved by the explorers, or in some cases found by their rescue parties. It gets worse, it's bad. This includes the cutlass that was carried by Charles Wilkes, the buffalo coat worn by Adolphus Greely, and a notebook carried by Charles Francis Hall. And if you were thinking of explorers and exploration based solely on our delineated expedition collections, you would imagine events of the distant past and failed events at that. Because you might be looking at a jar of hair and clothing remains and forks used by those so starved they had to resort to cannibalism, both from the Greely expedition. You would think of white men, because of course that's where these objects are from, and you would think possibly of colonialist, nationalistic impulses, given that these explorations were funded by the government and run by the military. But of course, we know that that isn't the extent of American exploration. But how does the American Museum of American History Museum, the National History Museum and the Natural History Museum really get me, tell the story with the things that we have? So several months ago, when George and Lacey came down, I put out a call to the curators for objects of exploration, whatever they thought that meant. And it yielded a plethora of other objects not officially categorized with the catalog term exploration. Objects that include a watch that was strapped to the hull of the Trieste. Did I say that right? Trieste. I knew that someone in here would know. That went to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. The dress designed and worn by Margaret Mead for her fieldwork. an early glass X-ray tube, and a flag fragment from a woman's suffrage protest. This new array of objects suggests to me different ways in which we might break out of the traditional category of the explorer at my museum, and we've seen that that was largely shaped by, not intention, but by circumstance. And so we can use these objects in ways that will help us see explorers both historic and contemporary in new lights. And I'm going to turn it over to Lacey to walk us through the rest.
Thank you, thank you. Hi. I have been here for over a dozen years, and this is my very first public lecture. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you. But here we are. Is this anyone's first time at the club? Oh my gosh, welcome. It's so great to have you here. So I always ask that question because I love sort of getting that context. And, you know, for our repeat offenders, welcome back. Thank you for coming back. But this is the building as you know and love it today. We actually had 8 different locations prior to settling here in 1964. But to give you a little bit of background on the clubhouse, or on the club itself, we were founded in 1904, and we were founded by 7 Arctic explorers. It was really, you know, the turn of the 20th century is the heroic age of polar exploration. Everyone is pushing those boundaries of further north, trying to be the first to get to the North Pole. And as Bethanee mentioned, most of them were government expeditions, right? And so our 7 founders were all part of what was called the Arctic Club of America, and said to themselves, well, wait a second, there's a lot more to explore than just the Arctic. And so their ideas became the foundation of our mission, which today is to explore land, sea, air, and space. And I'm sure many of you have heard this before, but I'll repeat it just in case. Our members have been very busy in accomplishing those goals. We were the first to the North and South Pole. We were the first to and you can see some of the lantern slides up there from that expedition. We were the first to North Pole Expedition, Matthew Henson. You've got the sled dogs there. That sledge over there is one from the Perry Henson Discovery Expedition. The first of the South Pole, Roald Amundsen and his team. You've got some lantern slides there and a hand-drawn iteration of the actual tent with the Norwegian flag flying above it. We were the first to the deepest point on Earth and to the highest point on Earth, the summit of Mount Everest. You've got Hillary and Norgay there. You've got Don Walsh and Jacques Picard. You can't see the Rolex that Bethanee has strapped to the Trieste in the photo, but it was there up there. And then, of course, we were the first to the surface of the moon, and you've got the Apollo 11 Explorers Club flag there, signed by the members of the crew. But what have we been doing since then? Today, we have about 3,500 active members. We represent over 60 countries. We have over 35 chapters internationally. And our members go on upwards of 600 expeditions. So we've really sort of moved past that idea of these government-funded expeditions for a myriad of reasons. But it's really all about pushing the boundaries of human knowledge in some scientific way. And the amazing thing about the club is, you know, so many people say, well, what's left to explore? What's left to find? And we always make the distinction here between the adventurer and the explorer, right? The adventurer is jumping out of a plane just because they can, right? The explorer is doing it for some scientifically motivated purpose, whether that be to test some sort of fabric in, whatever type of parachute they're using or flight suit they're using, or if they're testing atmospheric pressure in some capacity. That's the difference, and that's what our members are doing. And when you think about the idea of exploration, and that traditional ideal of finding something new for the very first time. Think about your own lives, right? For those of you who have come back to the club multiple times, you've seen something different every time you've come here. And that could be based on content, that could be based on people that you've spoken with, that could be based on the weather. And so apply that very small scale example globally, right? Whether that be going into the field, whether it be in the jungle, climbing a mountain, going down to the deepest point on Earth, and or beyond, right? We actually know more. We've had more people up until very recently, walk on the moon, then head down to the bottom of the Marianas Trench. That has since changed. But when you think about it, that's kind of an incredible statistic. And people see different things every time they go. And whether it's the finding something or the not finding something, it's all about telling the stories. And so we use artifacts here to tell those stories. And so, you do have the very traditional old school artifacts here in our collection, right? That's the door to the research collection. Our archive is about 550 linear feet of documents, photographs, lantern slides, and manuscripts. But our collection really only dates back to the late 1880s. And very often people say, hey, can you tell us the full history of exploration? No. And that's because A, what a task, but B, we tell the history of exploration through the scope of our members. And so we really focus on 20th century exploration up to current day exploration. So those are the things that you're finding in our collection. Adolphus Greeley was our first club president. The Lady Franklin Bay expedition, Bethanee touched on it briefly, very ill-fated, 1881 to 1884. 25 men went up to the Arctic, only 6 survived. We have in our collection the full contents of their archival materials. So we have all of their meteorological data, the things that they were observing. And the amazing thing about that research and that collection is it is still being used today. It is the baseline for climate change research because it's the most consistent data we have from that time period. So it's amazing to see how research changed and how these artifacts or these objects or these documents are used differently over time, right? In the long time that I've been here, I process about 500 research requests a year. I've never had the same question twice, which I think is kind of amazing. Some of our incredible old school artifacts, more traditional artifacts, which I also think as a note, and George, I think you'll appreciate this, when you think of sort of a traditional artifact, they're all very brown, aren't they? But up in the top right, or top left for you, I'm sorry, you have Matthew Henson's mittens from the North Pole Discovery Expedition. The mitten on the left is the interior layer, sealskin interior lined with seal fur and polar bear fur for warmth, but also waterproofing. They're both also water animals. The exterior layer, which kind of looks like an oven mitt, those are on display downstairs. Those are actually inscribed by Matthew Henson, worn by me to it being the North Pole. And so using this artifact as an example of how we change how we talk about artifacts and how we tell stories, even as recently as 10, 15 years ago, it would have been Matthew Henson, it would have been Robert Peary discovered the North Pole. And now it's, well, sure, but he was there with Matthew Henson, who worked with the Inuit really closely. And Henson and Peary had attempted the poles 6 times prior to reaching the pole in 1909, or getting very close. And it was because Henson said, well, wait a second, we haven't been successful. What's different between what the Inuit are doing and what we're doing? The Inuit live here. They've probably figured it out. So he lived with the Inuit for about 6 months prior to the start of the actual expedition. And together they redesigned the sledges. They redesigned their gear, their clothing. Explorers very often say there's no bad conditions, only bad gear and bad prep. And so things like that can now help tell the story of why we were successful or close to successful. Greeley's glasses from the Lady Franklin Bay expedition, amazing to think about what he saw through those lenses. The bullwhip, Indiana Jones, Roy Chapman Andrews, one of the real-life inspirations. He had that with him on the series of Central Asiatic expeditions where they discovered the first fossilized dinosaur eggs. In the center there, the Theodore Roosevelt box is how they used to carry lantern slides, and thinking about changing technology. Lantern slides are the earliest form of projected image. You would carry that box with you full of very heavy glass slides on your expedition. Underneath that is the interior of Richard Byrd's radio transmitter from his plane for his flight over the South Pole. And then all the way underneath the mittens there, that is a North Pole time capsule from 1983 that was left at the North Pole, which is just a floating piece of ice, knowing that one day it would drift away, and it was discovered off the coast of Ireland and returned to the club. So kind of amazing when you think about exploration communication and how we talk about those things. The flag is another incredible way to show sort of changing exploration and what the face of exploration looks like. Amelia Earhart, you can see her very grainy in that photo there. That is when the club awarded the flag to Richard Byrd for that flight over the South Pole. Underneath there, one of our first female members, Anna Roosevelt, elected in 1981 when we elected a class of 16 women to membership for the first time. She was one of the first female flag carriers on expedition. Now, much more common, that's Brittany Schmidt, who's one of our amazing EC50, and Callie Broaddus, again, one of our amazing EC50 awardees. And the photos just continue to change and look more and more and more like this, which is really incredible. So now our artifacts will get there, but will ultimately tell more full stories than just that wealthy gentleman's exploration. And now, I turn it back to George.
So, where are we in the 21st century? What is exploration? What are some of the characteristics of the contemporary explorer? And so I thought, what I did was, because I am a social scientist, I tried to find some patterns and data, and beginning with some quotes that Richard Weiss and Richard Garriott, Wade Davis, and others are saying these days about exploration, and then looking at our journal, which is published several times a year, as well as the EC50, the Explorers Club 50, which is 50 new explorers that are brought on board every year. I was one of those. And what we can see by looking at these journals and the EC50 members. And so here's just some thoughts, that to kind of get us started about contemporary exploration. If you're at some point in your life and been on a trip that couldn't be booked at a travel agency, and on that trip you did something to benefit science or humanity, you're qualified. Down at the bottom, as Lacey said, this is one we use, which is what distinguishes exploration from adventure, that this is a key distinction. Adventure offers thrills. True exploration always incorporates a component aimed at advancing scientific understanding. Wade Davis talked about the future of exploration is about expanding human potential, expanding awareness, and facilitating peace. It's not about being the first to reach a distant place. There's that idea. It's about transformation. Then over here with us, with the Explorers Club 50, here's a couple quotes. The EC50 may well be the most important initiative our club has ever undertaken. Celebrating the 40 Inuit Guides for Perry, which recently was done. It's all about diversity and shining a bright light on them, so they've been so long ignored in this process. And then Richard again, to shine a light on great figures who are not well known, diversity of explorers, giving them a voice, what criteria were considered for them and the questions they are asking. So why don't we look then at some of these 21st century explorers and see what patterns we can find that might help us understand where we are and where we might be going. So first point is that, as you might imagine, the traditional explorer tropes and ideas do continue to define us in the 21st century to a certain extent. In fact, I was having a conversation with my colleagues downstairs just before we came up here, and what we decided in our discussion was you really can't get away from some of these. They are going to remain with us and will remain embedded in who we are as explorers. Some of them I'm not so sure about. So the idea of expeditions, expeditions as rites of passage. I could talk to you about my expedition as a rite of passage without any problem, or of communion or epiphany. That still, I think, frames some of how we think about ourselves as explorers. Some of them are such as danger. Again, we were talking about this. Explorers are often associated with danger or something dangerous. Like, who cares about an explorer who isn't doing something that may entail losing their life, right? So highlighting the danger is always a good idea. If you buy me a drink, I'll tell you about how I almost died 5 times, you know? This one here, Brian Bouma noted that when he's writing, he said that one of the things was getting off the runway. Will we make it, I asked the pilot. And then we find out that he does make it, right? Lots of expeditions, lots of going places. We've got to travel a lot of places. That's in a lot of the ideas of explorers. So you'll see them right. I've been to 6 continents, 40 countries, lots of high points on the planet. You know, that is still part of us. Doing something no one else has done, like Joseph de Toury, lived underwater for 100 days. That's not going to be me. He is a biomedical engineer, and there's science in that stuff, but part of the whole gig is I lived underwater for 100 days, okay? And if you see where he lived, you'd like, okay, you deserve a flag. Or swimming a long ways. You know, Justin Fornell's an open water swimmer, and even though he's really involved in preservation of vanishing cultural traditions, he has a personal obsession with cold water swimming that started at an early age. All of these are still mixed into who we are, and any discussion of even 21st century explorers, you're going to find some of this stuff. But there's more. You know, diversity. You hear a lot about diversity nowadays, that we've changed and the world is different. Donald Johanson, whom I suspect many of you know, found Lucy. And he recently said, for me, one of the most exciting developments has been the expanding diversity of scientists working in the field, particularly of women. I am also encouraged and proud that there's been a dramatic increase in the number of African scientists. These 2 things, color and women, are an interesting part of our expanding ideas of diversity. I went back and looked at the Explorers Journal for the last 3 years, and all but a handful of the Explorers articles that are highlighted are still male, mostly white Americans or Europeans. So we still have a lot of work to do, right? But in my cohort of EC 50 members, 2022, half of the new members were people of color and non-Western cultures. And 18 of the 2022 EC 50 are women, including some amazing women, and we'll talk a little bit about what exploration is. Like Honoree, who's a Kurdish conservationist who studies Persian leopards. She's the only female conservationist in her country, right? And so these ideas of diversity, I still would suggest they are a work in progress, but we are making great strides in terms of who can be an explorer, right? And that means by gender or cultural background. Some of the, I like this part of my talk. Many of the 21st century explorers are going to emphasize, when you look at what they write, I found that they emphasize the centrality of storytelling. And you've heard a couple mentions of storytelling. Storytelling not so much about the artifacts that we have or telling stories about the explorers, but telling stories about people and the kinds of things that are happening, what we're learning. So you can see filmmakers, Tom, his passion is for storytelling. I tell stories of the people who show us we need to change, and they teach us how we can. These are all EC 50 members. Paige West, an anthropologist, emphasis is on stories in her work. Jessica Sandoval, oceanographer, female and a male-dominated field. I strive to get young people, particularly women, involved as a storyteller and poet. She writes poetry and children's books to try and get people to get more aware and interested in her field and that they could participate. Aishara Sridhar, who's a conservationist in India, writes, "My passion motivates me to ensure that as a global storyteller with an Indian heart." And Isai Madriz is an entomologist. He works, I added that. They focus on my laboratory works. Then I wrote, "with bugs." Combines science exploration of remote areas and storytelling about natural history through various media, telling stories about new species. So this idea of telling a story or being a storyteller seems to be a part of who we are in terms of explorers now. And we could talk more about that. Many of the 21st century explorers that we see are really outside the kind of frames that Bethanee and Lacey talked about with the beginnings of the institutions. And we now find artists, photographers, filmmakers, people using a lot of visual technology, app developers, drone users, and many more. So the world is opened up for an explorer to be someone that's not planting a flag on a mountain, but maybe as Pani Ngwa Lin Jensen, she's a tattoo artist, and she is teaching the Tunuit about their bodies and about reviving a cultural tradition, that as a form of exploration. Or Adrian Goud is a photographer who's interested in looking at nature in terms of composition, color, and should be abstraction, not composition there. Or Josie Island, who uses art, design, and research to celebrate marine flora and brings thoughtfulness and stewardship. On the other end, you have Vid Petrovic, who's a software developer, and he's dealing with data accumulation in marine ecology, digital archaeology, and cultural heritage, and developed a thing called the VizCore platform, which looks at ways of collecting data digitally and virtually on sites that are hard to exist. We do this a lot with LiDAR and drones and things like that now. So that this idea that explorers include a wider frame of people doing a wider set of things that maybe traditionally you and I wouldn't think of as explorers, such as an artist. My very close friend and colleague, Patricia Martin Morales, she's a Maya woman who has, on her own, learned how to reproduce the ancient Maya pottery, the beautiful polychromes, has discovered the pigments and how they were applied, and has recreated them to the point where she's on her way to Madrid in a couple weeks to talk about this, where she's going around the world showing about these techniques in ancient Maya pottery, recreating them as a Maya woman in Yucatan. Another characteristic that I found, and this is kind of like what's emerged from looking at these explorers themselves, is that teaching, empowering, and working closely with indigenous peoples, and inclusion are all things that I see in contemporary explorers. So 30 of the explorers in my cohort fell into this category in some way, and I'll repeat a couple of these. John Iney became a Mai chief in New Ireland, works with marine conservation and indigenous empowerment. See, so it's not just about me taking, it's about me giving and learning to empower and work with communities and cultures in ways that are part of this new process of exploration. So community outreach, working in the culture, not just learning what you can from the culture, but working for the culture, for the children. Another one of my very good friends, Ivan Batun, is another Maya. This is where I work, so it's not surprising, right? He's a Maya archaeologist and anthropologist, and he is working now almost continuously with local Maya communities, trying to help them understand the ways that they used to live and how they can bring these things back in a way that empowers them. Particularly in his case right now, he's working with Melipona, or the stingless bees of Yucatan. and these have almost gone extinct. And so the idea that communities are learning how to bring these bees back, because then you could have them right in your front yard, they're not going to bother you. And so this kind of empowerment process. Andres Gallegos is a conservationist, but he also calls himself an educator. He was blessed by a shaman. He creates field teams and works with local communities and peoples. Again, all of this is normal now. We are, in our DNA, we are thinking we need to teach, we need to empower, we need to not only use indigenous peoples, but work with them, give to them, and include them. And so I have this oops here, which just appeared a few weeks ago. I found it. Oxford University omits Indonesian researchers in rare Rafflesia discovery. And here these these Oxford University researchers forgot when they presented their stuff to mention the local people that they were working with when they announced their discoveries, even though they'd been working with some of these people for 13 years. And so as a result, there's been a global backlash from this sort of thing. You know, 20 years ago, who would have given up about the local workers, right? But nowadays, you better acknowledge the role of the local people and indigenous people you work with. So here's another one. Many 21st century explorers operate nonprofits. We are involved with lots of emphasis on conservation, cultural heritage, as Lacey said, climate change. And so you see emerging with explorers now the development of nonprofit organizations to carry out not only their research and exploration, but to achieve the goals with communities and with conservation efforts. So here are a few of these. Constance Scharf has created the Human Resilience Project to study how different populations around the world are responding to climate change, which is a very interesting topic. John Mack has a NGO aimed at preserving humans' awe and connection to the natural world in an age of exponential digital distraction. So his NGO is to get you to stop looking at your screen and figure out how to get humanity to spend more time actually in the natural world. John All's NGO works at climate change. Choi's has got Project Moon Bear, which is a conservation project in Korea, NGO that looks at black bear conservation and creating a bear sanctuary, which I'll mention some more. Javier Roballo, and I'll mention him again too, the director of Fundación Icominga, has created a nonprofit that's involved in preserving and maintaining thousands and thousands of acres in Ecuador. So again, these individuals are all framing their idea of exploration in the idea that they are creating nonprofits to carry out their goals. So it's more than an expedition. Which brings me to kind of like this next step. 21st century exploration, in many cases, is a transitional process. Explorers are builders. They do science conservation, indigenous people, cultural heritage, nonprofits. They're serving lots of stakeholders now. We're expected to serve lots of stakeholders. And the projects grow and change over time. I'm going to talk a little bit about me because that's what happened to me. I'm one of these individuals. But here's a couple others. Bill Steele has been an EC member forever and been on, 22 flag-bearing expeditions. He works in Huautla. I don't know if you've ever been to Huautla. It's in Oaxaca, and it's a beautiful part of the country. And he's been part of the center for exploring the cave system there, maybe the largest cave system in the world. And so when he first got started, Bill was focusing on exploring the caves. How deep are the caves? Let's keep going. It goes forever. I'm a deeper man than any human's ever been in a cave. And over time, he realized that there's more to understanding caves than just mapping them and going through them. So his project has become a multi-dimensional program of research that includes climate, flora and fauna, geology, archaeology, and then lately he's begun inviting teachers and students into parts of the cave, and actually has a lawyer now who has, Montese, who's learned Mazatec, the local language in that part of Oaxaca, and serves as a diplomat and translator working with communities and getting them involved in this cave research and how it fits into the lives of the Mazatec people. Roballo, who I mentioned with his Fundación Icomingo, he presently has 27,000 acres in it should be Ecuador, not Ecuador. As a biologist and educator, again, lots of expeditions into orchids, which is something I'm getting my head wrapped around in Yucatan now, orchids. My work involves creating private protected areas to motivate local and indigenous people to join. We have a responsibility to take care of the forests and bring people together by expanding the network of people who explore the forest together. And by doing so, they expand the definition of exploration itself. So I'm one of these transitional ones, and so I thought I'd take a few minutes and kind of show you what I do and how I got to where I am today. So I work in Yucatan, and I started over there in the area called Ekbalam, that site, and now I'm down where you see Xocnaque, Kiwik, Paso de Macho, and that's where I've focused my work. Actually, I'm celebrating my 25th year down in the jungle down there. I know, it's pretty great. So we formed Kashil Kiwik, a biocultural reserve, with the support and help of where I teach at Millsaps College. And as you'll see, we call this a reserve without boundaries. Here I am in the 1980s with my partner, Tomás Gaireta Negron. And here I'm kind of in a traditional explorer pose, you know. We found a couple statues. You could see them in the museum. Here are my indigenous friends standing there, and look at me. I'm smiling, and they are not. You know. Okay, here's a funny story. Okay, this has nothing, but this picture here is with Evaristo I, the tallest Maya guy with the kind of angle there, you know, no shirt on, and that's Tomás and me. And then Evaristo's family. So I posted this picture on social media a while back, and the littlest baby, Evaristo's youngest daughter, somebody else posted it, and that little baby saw themselves in this picture. And so we've gotten reconnected with her and her kids and the others, and are making arrangements to go back and reproduce this photo with the family. So when we first started, I didn't learn any of this stuff I'm talking to you about in school, right? I went to Tulane University as a Maya archaeologist, and I learned that we go down, we dig, we find stuff, we explore, and that's our job. And so this is where I started working at Ekbalam in the 80s, right? That's my late friend, Dr. William Ringel. That was Ekbalam when we found it. That is Ekbalam today. I know. The forest is gone. The animals are gone. This is a garden now, where you can drive in large numbers of tourist buses. And then, so we saw the forest being destroyed. We saw the highways being put in, tourist places there for the buses, restaurants. And then we saw the local communities getting sucked into all of this by building T-shirt shops and hotels, eco-hotels, and working in eco-hotels. So what we learned, this is what I learned, is that being my traditional explorer really was not very responsible. And being a traditional explorer, I didn't have any real understanding or learning about the impact I was having on the environment, that I was having on the information I was interested in, the site itself, or on the local communities, or the whole idea of our global relationship to things like tourism, you know, which tourists follow the explorers. Don't get that wrong. And so we decided to see if we could try something different. So Tomas and I began working with Millsaps College, and they were very supportive to start us off. And we wound up finding an area in the middle of the jungle that was beautiful and was owned by a family since the 18th century, and the owner had died, and people were worried that the forest was going to be destroyed, so we began purchasing the forest. We wound up protecting or preserving 4,500 acres. So the biocultural reserve is 4,500 acres of forest. That's the biocultural reserve, right? It's beautiful. So the archaeological site is underneath that. Where the red trees are, those are flamboyants. That's where my research center is. And the reason those trees are there is because in the 18th century, they were imported into the community. They're a good sign that someone lived there after the abandonment by the ancient Maya. So that's what it looks like under the forest. These sites, the site is still largely preserved inside the jungle. We try as hard as we can not to damage the jungle. Oh, sorry. Oop. Here we are excavating. We do archaeology. That's the throne room of the palace, which if you come visit me, that's where we're working right now. So we do traditional archaeology, but we work very hard to minimize impact on the plants and animals. We're not open to the public, so we've created an environment where tourism will not impact this. And so we can work with the archaeology and also with nature, the animals and such, as part of it. And that's what we realize, is that the archaeology is part of a system that includes biological conservation, outreach to communities. We're surrounded by Maya-speaking people in traditional communities, all working together. I've been here 25 years. I'm a stakeholder. When I screw up, I'm not running away. I'm sitting down with the local community leaders, and we have to solve the problem. So we're part of the larger landscape. So exploration, in this case, like with some of these others, we're permanent members of that kind of landscape now, right? We're a nonprofit, just like I've talked about. And so we have to go out and track donors and foundations and work with the Mexican and U.S. governments. And as a part of that, we've increased the range of projects and ideas that we do. We've built a completely off-the-grid research and learning center. This is solar-powered wet water waste management. The only thing we bring out there is the propane for the kitchen. But all of this research and learning center is done in a sustainable and, I think, what's the word I'm looking for? Responsible way, right? We do use new technologies, and I have to throw this in. I was talking about LiDAR. LiDAR is another way you can do incredible work without damaging the landscape. What you do is you fly over it, you collect laser data, and then you can literally remove the forest from the data and see the archaeological or other remains underneath it without touching anything. So that slide in the upper corner there, that gray one, that's Kiwik, where I work, with all the forests removed. We can map, we can see the details without having to dig everything up. And what we've learned in the case of our reserve without boundaries is that the population of the Maya in this district is enormous. Here's my little site of Kiwik in the reserve. And then all of those dots there are other ancient cities that are there. So we're now thinking there was over 100,000 people just living in this 500 square kilometer area. Today there's no one there. one of the questions we're interested in is what failed. You know, they were there for 2,000 years and then they left, and the entire area is abandoned today. We have the forest then, so we're doing archaeology in the forest, and we have to take care of the forest as part of this, so we have to learn how to do it. It's dry tropical forest. It's highly endangered. In our case, no one cares about dry tropical forest because it's not very cute in the end of the dry system. So in the north, everyone loves the wetlands, and in the south, everyone loves the rainforest, but this stuff has just fallen through the cracks, so we've become a central component in preserving this, working with the government to expand Nature Conservancy, World Wildlife Fund, United Nations, and things like that. And we presently then have evolved to where we have a full-time staff with the reserve director. We have rangers and caretakers, biological educators. These are all Maya people from the local communities. Armin Uk Uk with his diploma. We've supported him. He's graduated from college in Merida, and so we'll be the future director. And so we're hoping to shift a lot of this over to indigenous ownership or involvement beyond just being a ranger. So he works with a lot of our projects. Besides being really handsome, he's a really incredible human being. We have now got the funding and support for a full-time professor of biology, Dr. Carlos Ibarra, who's a Peruvian biologist who works with us developing the conservation programs, because it's not just studying the forest and jungle, it's also figuring out how to preserve and conserve it with these other forces and variables that we deal with. Recently, we were lucky enough to get funding from the Disney Conservation Fund, and Dr. Ibarra is just finishing up a report for them on a project we call Monitoring Threatened Species in the Pook region. And we're a major corridor for jaguars going north and south. And so we have one of the largest collections of data on jaguars in Central America. And also we have all 5 species of cats in the reserve that we've determined: margays, ocelots, jaguars, jaguarundis, and puma. And so this is a central part of what we've become. And then as part of the vision, we are a platform for development and support of outreach efforts. So we do things like there's no high schools out there. So when the kids graduate from middle school, they're basically done, you know. So we've raised funds to support a high school scholarship program and get them into the municipal capital, get them into high schools, and now some of them are going to college. Here's a cool one. We do language visitation programs. These people you see up in the upper corner there, those are Maya women and kids. They've never been to a Maya site, even though Maya archaeology and tourism is like the #1 thing down there in terms of making money. They've never had a chance to see their own ancestors or heritage. So we've trained Maya speakers to work with the local Maya people in Maya so that they could begin to understand their own cultural heritage. Recently, we're really proud of the fact that with support from a woman named Donna Ruth Else Roberts, we have built a library down there. And the library is going to be a central hub for disseminating education, health education, children's education. We're getting ready to hire a trilingual person who graduated from my program who speaks Maya, English, and Spanish to work with kids. We know that Maya kids don't read books at home. Nobody reads to them at night when they're going to bed. So we want to start a reading program where they could come out and do that and work together. I could go on and on about that, right? And we also do a seed bank and a nursery. We've given away some 68,000 trees to local people. You know what they use to cook their food on, right, in the jungle? Firewood. That means cutting your trees down, which means if your population's growing, you're cutting more trees down. And so entire communities are basically eating up the forest that surrounds them. So we provide free of charge through some grants, new trees where they can start reforesting the communities, plus a seed bank for obvious reasons, right? We want to collect all the seeds that are out there so we could preserve and conserve those. Someone might know Longwood Gardens in Pennsylvania. We're working with them with their seed bank idea, particularly with orchids. We're going to start with orchids, right? So that's the end for my spiel. And basically what we wanted to show you was where we are today, what exploration means today, what are some of the characteristics of 21st century exploration, and also I wanted to share with you a little bit of an example of how I went from kind of being a problem to hopefully being part of a solution, or at least being part of a world in which exploration is integrated into conservation, working with communities, being a good stakeholder and a good citizen, a global citizen, right? So what we thought we'd do now is have my colleagues come up here and sit down. Sit down. And thank you for your patience. I'm really impressed with how many people showed up. Let me see. Yeah. Right. And I saw a lot of people have never been here before, which means that somewhere in your brains there was an attraction to this topic, maybe, that you wanted to think about this or learn a little bit about it. And I think, again, it's exciting and really provocative, you know, what exploration is involved in. And these people are, they won't admit it, but they're part of really, I think, two of the most important institutions in the country as regards the study and sustaining of exploration, right? So I thought maybe we'd ask them some questions and see if they have any ideas. So my first question for the two of you is, as someone from the National Museum of American History and someone from the Explorers Club, which I think are like these hubs of exploration, maybe each of you could share with us a little bit what you find are some of the challenges that you face with exploration and explorers in the 21st century. Because the narrative, it's easy to talk about that early stuff, right? It makes a good story, like you said, and the objects are really good. But I would suspect that things have changed or are changing. So whoever would like to start first.
Is this already on? Okay. Well, the thing is, we're going to say the same thing.
That's which is okay.
We already know that, because the problem is the stuff.
Yes, and I pointed out in my slides, and Bethanee could absolutely say the same, the things that we showed you are very brown, right? They look old, they look dusty. I always joke, you know, if it's old and dusty, it's probably within my domain here at the club. But you see the changing face of exploration, and I don't just mean that physically, right? I mean, people are literally inventing fields of science here, and sort of trying to explain what 10 years ago we didn't even know existed, right? The nomenclature, we don't know what we don't know, is very true, and that's really what we deal with. And so, you know, deciding what these artifacts look like now is really interesting, because what, you know, 50 years ago would have been something very, let's say, obvious, right? Today is very, very different. You know, you wouldn't think, oh, let's put a drone on display, because that's something that we see very often, right? But what if that drone was the first thing to see A, B, C, and D, right? Then it takes on this, you know, inherently interesting and new meaning, right? But the other challenge is that these things are still, at least for me, are still very much in use, right? So if we take, you know, we get sort of all museum-y and museum nerdy, which we can, you know, the importance of the object is its usefulness, right? And what its purpose is. So if you take that object, You take that drone out of commission and you put it on display in a display case here at the club because someone did something really cool with it. Well, that person who did something really cool with it can't use it to do more cool things, right? So it's how do we tell these stories and how do we represent what our members are doing and what explorers are doing today by A, not hindering what they're doing, because then we wouldn't exist at all, and B, really making it meaningful and making someone say, hey, that's actually really cool, right? It's not just a drone that I can buy on Amazon. It's done something really important.
And then I think it's still the stuff, but slightly different at the Smithsonian in that most of our explorer items come to us because they were funded by the government, right? And so they ended up at a government institution. And when the government stopped funding exploration, then people had their own private things. And then they decided we're going to give it to Lacey instead of to the Smithsonian, right? Because there's a place that, that will collect it and talk specifically about my exploration, right? And so for me, the challenge is really, how do I think of exploration outside of the Arctic explorer, right? How do I expand my definition of exploration? So for me, diversity in exploration is not necessarily gender, race, creed, whatever. It's type of exploration. So when someone suggested that I show like a protest flag, right, that was from when women didn't have the right to vote before 1919 and women put themselves in front of the White House, they were exploring different ways in which they could affect their government. Some people could say that that's a stretch of what an explorer is, and per the definition of the club, that might be, but it works for me, and I'm going to use it.
And that's the other thing that's really interesting and really challenging, right? People love to define things. But here at the club, and really even broader, right, there really is no definition for exploration. I mean, we define exploration here at the club as curiosity in action. So make of that what you will, right? It could go in any number of directions and beyond what you're even thinking, right? I had someone a couple weeks ago who was here for a private event ask me if a robot had ever carried the Explorers Club flag. And I said, well, not yet, but who knows? It could very well happen. And so it's kind of, sort of putting a label on things that we don't want to necessarily define. Because, when you think of the artist as an explorer, many people think, well, that's not real, right? Artists have always been a part of expeditions. And, you see their artwork throughout the clubhouse, you see their artwork in the Smithsonian. But it's also redefining what art means and what art looks like, right? It's the poet, it's the musician, it's the person taking bird sounds and turning them into, musical numbers and sort of this DJ sort of punk tech thing, and really using it that way. And, when people say, well, that's not exploration, why not? And I think that's really interesting to talk about too.
I saw where some guy attached some things to fungus or mold or mushrooms, and he has that creating music. But I got a couple questions. One is, are you getting things that are coming from 21st century explorers? Are they showing up and saying, put my drone in, or have you kind of, that brown and dusty stuff, is that still where people's heads are at?
I think for the Smithsonian, it's a different time because the Smithsonian became 21 different museums, right? And so the stuff that we had originally really comes out of the great man theory, right? And it's stuff that someone used to do something. But now, if you're the fungus man who makes music with the fungi, right?
Yeah, it's really good.
I think I've also seen this.
You've seen that?
Yeah. You're probably going to go to like the Natural History Museum if it comes to you that you want to donate your stuff. And so you're not coming to American history, which is fine, but it makes it more difficult for me to complicate my narrative, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're still getting stuff, but it's dispersed among the Smithsonian. And so to make a story out of it, you have to work a lot harder, I think, to see the narrative.
Do you have to have dealing with your institutions? I mean, the idea, like you're saying, an artist is an explorer. If they show up with their art, are you going to be open-minded, or the institution open-minded about thinking about that as exploration?
Yeah, it's up to the individual who takes it in as far as, and so maybe it's up to Lacey here, I don't know, but to tag it with the explorer.
Yeah, you've got a bigger.
Yeah, there's a bunch of people that are responsible for that stuff. It's not just me,
but yeah, no, in terms of us and acquiring new things or new stuff, as I said before, if we take something from someone who is a current member, as much as we want to be representative of our current membership, we had, as an example, a member by the name of Callie Veelenturf, who's integral in terms of the rights of nature. She does, I call her the queen of sea turtles. She essentially loaned us an out-of-commission turtle tracker. And when they got the funding to repair it, I had to give it back so she could use it again. And so it's very real in terms of what we're doing and what we can display, right? So yes, we're getting things, but it's more of a temporary loan situation if we get something at all. We just had to give Mark Bezos back his chair that he flew to space in on Blue Origin.
Okay, wait, I have a question. I have a museum nerd question.
Yeah.
Were those loans, or did you accession those items?
They were loans.
Okay.
In those particular examples. However, there have been certain cases where, someone has said, hey, this is a donation, and then come to me. And you have to be really open to that kind of thing. I always say the hardest part about my job is I have a museum collection in a non-museum setting, right? Where I don't have the bureaucracy of the Smithsonian. I can just say, okay, yes, I understand why you need that back, so you can go back and do this groundbreaking work. The flag is a really good example of that, right? So the flag, these are retired flags, but we have 250 flags in our collection history, and they're passed from expedition to expedition. So I have to figure out how to get this artifact, right, which is one of the only things in the world that has ever been to both the highest and lowest points on Earth. I have to figure out how to safely get it somewhere outrageous, right? And keep it museum quality shipping and packing, but knowing that it's going into the jungle. And George and Bethanee love the story. I have a flag in the collection that can't go back out into circulation because it's covered in poisonous bat guano, and anything else that would come in contact with it would totally mess with the biome of wherever else it was going. So there's things like that you don't think about, but you have to consider. So yes, we do get new things. I typically say, there's really a 20 to 30 year lag between when something officially comes into the collection.
Lag.
Yeah,
That's
right. And it
point.
is typically, and I often say this too, if I know your name as an explorer, it's probably a bad thing because it probably means you have passed on. And so that means your family didn't know what to do with your stuff and they sent it to me. And that's typically how we get things. So that's also why, you see a lot of the old brown dusty stuff, which I love, don't get me wrong, that's why I do what I do, but that's why that is mostly on display, is because that's what we have, right? So it's figuring out ways to, again, tell these stories without actually having anything concrete to go along with them.
You were shaking your head. You were shaking your head no.
You're
shaking your head like,
when you give something to the government,
You don't get it
and
back.
you sign it over, it's really difficult to get it back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it can be done, but only in very certain circumstances. And an interesting observation about 20 to 30 years behind. So I don't exploration is not my full-time gig at the Smithsonian. I actually work in political history, and there's a very interesting trend with personal items of the presidents, right? So we get a lot of them, and then they kind of dribble off. And particularly presidents that have been assassinated, because people are trying to make sense of this thing, right? We have almost zero from JFK. And the only reason that I can think of for that is that it's still within living memory for people. And so it still means something to them, right? It's still in their house, it's still in their attic. Mm-hmm. And you're dealing with stuff that not only is still in living memory, but it's still in actual use, right? Mm-hmm. And so you have to really wait until you know their name, right, to get their stuff.
Yeah, or be prepared to give it back.
Right, and I am not.
Okay. So, I have a lot of questions about that too, but I'm going to move on to another question, which is audience, right? Both of you deal with your audiences, the stories you tell, the objects, and the presentation. So in this case, we're talking about 21st century exploration, and I really think it's important for us to think about the idea that 21st explorers now really might be better thought about and understood in 2080 or something like that, right, when I'm dead. I know, that's... But maybe you could talk a little bit about the way audiences feed into, or how you might think about audiences feeding into this particular issue. You know, Lacey alluded to it. Is an artist an explorer, you know? Is somebody going to go into the Smithsonian, or do you even think about it in terms of, what are you smiling? That when that your audience has certain conceptions or interests or needs or whatever, and as two central places for this kind of presentation and discussion of the topic, that they have, you have to think about that, right? So that's my question.
Yeah, so if you go today to the Smithsonian, to the American History Museum, there are 3 things that you're probably looking for. What is one of them?
The American flag, that giant flag. A giant flag?
The giant flag. Okay.
The ruby slippers.
The ruby slippers. Oh, wrong museum. Sorry. All the Explorer stuff is going to the Natural History Museum. That's right. Yeah.
Those guitars.
The guitar. So Lincoln's hat, the ruby slippers, the flag there are like the 3 main things, but also First Lady's gowns. That's a big one, right?
I love that.
Right? Well, we did a study of how many we have to have on the floor before people start complaining. Now, I can't remember exactly how many it is. You have to look it up. But there is a very clear expectation, particularly of an institution that belongs to the public, right? Everyone has a stake in it, and so you do get to have a say as to what we put on the floor. I don't know if explorers get to have a say as to what you put on the floor, or if you get to decide all of it. But we always have to have a floor space dedicated to certain things, right, that people who may only come once want and need to see, and B, to meet their expectations.
You know, it's very similar. I mean, we are, again, a museum collection in a non-museum setting. However, I do serve members and their guests and the public. And so, you know, everybody, when you come here, thinks about the famous first. If I do not have the Apollo 11 moon flag on display, people are upset. And we've been under construction for the past couple of years, so things have moved and changed and shifted. And, you know, we're still not really up and running at full capacity in terms of our displays and exhibits. And people comment, and people absolutely want to see certain things here. And so, you know, it's always the balance of, you know, showcasing those greatest hits, as I call them, you know, people wanting to see what they want to see, but also incorporating the new stories. And so, but also for us in particular, I really believe in kind of not shying away from the hard histories. You know, if you walk around, you don't see a ton of women represented, and that's because women weren't members until 1981. So I don't really have a lot of their stuff. And, you know, a lot of people will say, well, why don't you just put up a display case of women at the club? And it's like, well, because then that points out even further that it's just this other thing in a corner, right? Like it's to me, more meaningful to more naturally integrate them into the story, because we're obviously very much part of the story. I'm not suggesting that, but, you know, in terms of sharing the scope and how they're integrated, if you go upstairs, and this is something we did earlier today, if you go upstairs and look at our Hall of Fame of our past presidents, our honorary members, our medal winners, you don't see women until the last, like, 1/8 of the wall. And, you know, to sort of go back and change that and, you know, put Amelia Earhart up there because she was part of the story, or put, you know, Marie Perry up there, they weren't technically members. So it's sort of this revisionist history in a sense, and kind of, I think, makes things a little bit more glaring of like, this was just, they're trying to be corrective, and we don't want to do that either.
Felix,
or overly corrective, let's say.
Okay.
Sure.
So this is what we were doing in DC, and this went on a long time. These are really fascinating questions, and we have two of the best people to discuss them. But I'd like to take the last few minutes and open the floor up to the audience and see if anybody has a question that they'd like to ask one of them.
I have a question and a comment. First,
Okay.
I've been a member since 1984, so I've seen a lot of changes. The second thing is compliments to Lacey, who's been here a very long time and single-handedly has held down the fort, as it were. And thank you for your comments. I think the Explorers Club really didn't reach out and recognize other voices and include them in any meaningful way. Forget about the women, because once we were here, we had a voice, but until George Floyd. And there was a lot of dispute in the club, but that's when things really began to change. And that's when, after George Floyd, the Explorers 50 was an idea of Joe from Disney, who came up with it. And I really think it's brilliant in so many ways, as you've pointed out, because it's introduced a wide range of people that nobody would have ever known about, who are doing things. Okay, I don't want to take any more
That's
time.
beautiful, thank you.
And
Joe
so
is-
thank you for that. And I just want to bring in one other comment, which is that UNESCO, to which the US no longer belongs, has projects going on called Project MOST. And I'm a trustee in a UK charity that works with the Koji. And I believe that those projects are the first which are not at all empowering, but rather look at the indigenous person as the empowered to teach us and give them the opportunity to do so. So I think we have to really get rid of the Orientalism and really focus on the fact that sometimes people like the Koji, with their dry forests, and others may in fact have the solutions that our scientists from the West can learn from. And thank you all for your
No,
presentation.
you know, I think that's a great point, because the hardest part of what we do is not just trying to tell indigenous peoples or communities what we can do and how we can help them, but to create spaces where they're telling us what they can do and how we can work with them. It's really, you know, that's the hardest thing I think that we're involved in. Thank you. Other questions?
I have a question about the intersection of what becomes an artifact. It occurred to me as you guys were discussing that we have an archaeologist and museum curators, and you're dealing with artifacts in one way that then become the artifacts for a museum. I don't really know how to formulate my question, but there is a sense to me that if you were excavating a museum, that would be nonsensical. And I suppose my question there is, what is that transition between use and artifact, and how does that happen?
Well, I mean, what part, I'm not sure I'm going to answer your question, but for an archaeologist, everything we touch and record is an artifact, right? That's a category. That means I have 500,000 potsherds. Those are objects of study. They're not objects to be displayed or put into a museum. There may be better ways to tell their story and get information out through like digital means and other kinds of things. But the artifact, it comes to audience again, right? That the artifacts that are here and in the Smithsonian, many of them, in both cases, are not, a lot of the stuff's not on display. It's being preserved, but the amount of material is substantially different, and the nature of, I don't want to say the quality, you know, I have 100,000 undecorated body sherds, and nobody is interested in that except me. And so that's a very different artifact than anything that I think anyone in this audience probably would consider. So,
Yeah, I mean, for us, in terms of artifacts, you know, people very generally jump to the things that you want to see on display, the things that are, meaningful in some way. But it's things that tell a story, right? And so even though it's an object of study and might not be on display, it's still going to tell a story,
we're still
right?
telling a story.
And so I think that's really the distinction, right? And in that case, you can get into like the crazy conversation of, well, then doesn't everything tell a story? Couldn't you preserve this water because it's what Lacey drank at, this lecture, which was the best lecture anyone's ever been to, So it's, exactly, yeah. So you have to kind of weigh the importance of the story you're trying to tell. And I think, that's sort of where we come into things, right? You can buy a drone on Amazon and have it to you tomorrow, and someone could buy the same drone, and it's, what do you do with that drone? Are you, using it to go on some sort of expedition and find something really cool? Are you just using it to fly around your backyard? Maybe that's meaningful to you, but maybe not meaningful to the audience or the larger scope. So I think that's really the distinction, and you can kind of tell me I'm wrong.
No, you're not. I think that's something that like everyone in this room could have a separate definition of,
exactly.
right? But for me, when I'm thinking of archaeology, I'm thinking of that you're looking at the potsherds and saying, what does this tell me about yesterday, right? And everything that I'm collecting or that's in the museum already that I did not collect, I want to know what it tells me about us today, right?
That's good.
Yeah. So good. Yeah. Thank you.
That's why we brought her up here.
Does that sort of answer your question, sir?
Are you conscious of the narrative that you're constructing at each point?
In certain ways, I mean, me in certain ways, but in certain ways not. Because, for example, right now I'm trying to find evidence of ancient pulque, which becomes tequila, on pottery, right? And so when I first started working with the artifacts, there wasn't a technology that would allow me to do that, so it wasn't part of my narrative. So as the technology changed, my questions and how I approached the artifacts changed too. So that's just one way that works.
And I think that similarly, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, no,
George.
go ahead.
Okay. Similarly to the explorer's profession, if you want to call it that, right? The historian profession has also looked at itself and gone, how have we harmed society, right? And we know that's because we have constructed certain narratives around certain people or certain topics and left other people out. So I at least try to be very conscious of it, right, when I'm in the moment when I'm doing it.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know that that narrative can change as more information becomes available, right? So things that were acceptable 5, 10, 50 years ago maybe have changed now, or language that we've used 5, 10, 50 years ago has changed. And so I think that's a really important part of it too, and you have to be mindful of it. But you also have to be open to changing the narrative.
Do we have time for one more?
Yeah, maybe two more.
One or two more? Anybody? Yes, please.
Hi, thank you. I had a question about with the climate change data from the North Pole, right? That was like a physical object, and with data that's still being used today, and with the scientific data that people are collecting now, a lot of that is digital and online. And so is there a place for museums to deal with the digital data, and also especially with, the definition of exploration versus adventure and the science being part of it? How do you incorporate that as part of the narrative? Thank you.
Yeah, it's called a digital asset management system. And it's where you store all of your digital-based objects, let's say. And there's actually a really interesting debate for museum nerds or archival nerds that, if you print out an email or a digital-born object, you're actually sort of taking away its integrity in some aspect. That's very, but you can totally get into those conversations, right? So, but yes, we do have large digital repositories. People send us things. A good example here at the club, our membership applications used to be pen and paper. Now it's completely digital born. So, but we're still saving those.
We're not quite there yet. That's all I have.
We can do.
Well, there's an increasing desire to have data in a digital format,
Yeah.
right? Whether that's artifact data or LiDAR maps or photographs or everything we've done for the last 25 years. And so we're now facing that fact, and it's a real challenge for us. I think the creation of these digital management systems is one of the biggest things we're dealing with right now. It's very expensive. It demands technology. But I will tell you, one of the things that's kind of driving me is that it will open up the narrative. If you're in Munich and you could get into my data set and look at those sherds, 3D images of those potsherds, God knows what you could come up with. You know, same thing with climate data or something else. It opens up the world for a whole other group of people to participate in the process of exploration.
And I think the really cool thing about that too is not only does it increase accessibility, which is huge. Why are we saving these things if we're not sharing them? But it's also an amazing tool for preservation, right? So God forbid there's a major fire or flood. If we have these digital repositories, we still have these, you know, these artifacts or these documents in some format.
I saw someone back there. Yeah.
Be like,
And
We
then-
won't let him pass you by.
don't worry, you're next.
Yeah, I have a related question, just the corollary to that. Like, how are you increasing the accessibility of all of these data sets and ensuring that things that are stored in the collection? I'm from DC, so like I've seen like over the years, a lot of the things that you didn't say were on display. I remember touring in like the early 80s. So the challenge is you have these vast collections of information and data and content that isn't being shown. So the question is, how can that be more broadly put online or made available in some other context so that people can't access it?
I can say, I mean, it's not that we're not totally not there yet. It's just very, very difficult, right? So Smithsonian has been trying for years and years to try and get more of its collections online. And we did something a few years ago, which we called flipping the switch, which was just saying, here's all of our information and you guys can have it. The problem being that the information that we have to give you is only as good as what we have, and what we have sometimes isn't very good, right? So it generates more questions than it's making than people can make sense of. The other issue for us is that we're bound up by government red tape, right? So we have lots of issues of what can we put out on the internet, what can't we put out on the internet, can I trace it back to you if you gave me this button, did you allow me to? And so it just takes an individual looking at all of these different pieces, and so that takes forever when you have hundreds of thousands of objects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same. Even though I'm not bound by government red tape, it's, you know, in a membership file, you might find an old check from somebody. You obviously don't want to put that online, right? So it's going through and sort of scrubbing things that don't necessarily need to be shared. In terms of, you know, increasing accessibility, the club, as an example, I know the Smithsonian too, I think, we're on the Bloomberg Connects app, so you can have a digital guide there. And so it's things like that which are not by no means perfect and are by no means complete. But I would argue that there is never going to be a complete repository of digital collections for any institution, because I can tell you right now, we're never going to digitize certain things in our collection because A, they're confidential, B, they're not necessarily relevant for anyone but the admin of the club. So it's just sort of prioritizing what audiences are interested in and what your researchers are going to use, you know, and how you can make those things accessible.
Yeah. One last question, thank you.
Thank you very much for all these interesting insights. I have a question related to, George, what you said at the beginning, your like first project and how it became this huge tourism site, and how you're doing projects now. And I was wondering if you, maybe all of you, could share some thoughts on these topics of like exploration, curiosity, access, for whom, knowledge generation, for whom, how to share these insights with people who can go, who cannot go,
Right.
and
Great question.
yeah, just like
Right.
where
So-
the funding comes
Right.
from.
So in
and-
my particular
yeah.
case, I'm just going to say,
Yeah.
in my particular case, the site that I left, Ekbalam, which is now a large tourist site, or like Chichen Itza or Uxmal or these others, Petra or Giza or these sites, we, my team, believe that they're there, and people need them. Certain people provide them access, but that there are other places that we're trying to be a model for that might provide access to people who want to explore things differently. We're more interested in looking at these more complex questions. Some people want to get off that bus, jump in front of the pyramid, get their Instagram photo, and get back on and go to their hotel, and that's fine. But there are many people who want to learn the kinds of complex interactions between communities, conservation, and heritage, how preserving forests for the jaguars helps preserve the cultural heritage of the archaeological remains, which in turn helps interactions with communities. So I don't think we're trying to replace, in my particular case, I think we're trying to offer an alternative through this model of exploration, an alternative model for people to learn. And simply, if we allowed open access to this reserve or some of the others that I've mentioned, it would destroy the value that they have, right? Does that answer your question, kind of? Yeah. Is there another part before I split about that? I mean, it's a complex question, right? And because in some ways you don't want to say, oh, let's keep the people out, right? But we're working on trying to just offer something alternative, like the Maya people. Imagine when we started working with them, I thought we said, who built these ruins? And the communities thought they were built by Arabs. Many of the people did not even associate their own ancestors to these archaeological. Well, we could fill that niche a little bit. They can't pay $70 to go take the Instagram photograph, but we could bring them out and talk about plants, animals, and things like that, and creates a different set of conversations and opportunities. So that's what I'm trying to do. Yeah.
Everyone, please give a round of applause for our 3 speakers. Thank you, everyone, for coming. The bar downstairs is open until 9:30, 10 p.m., and we hope to see you again.
Thank you.
I'm going to shout out Felix, who is in charge of these public lectures, who's amazing. Come back and see his slate in 2026, because he's got an amazing lineup for you. Buy him a drink.
Thank you. Thank you all. My pleasure. Thank you so much.
I went to give it to you.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, you guys killed this.
She was like, I don't know why I handed it to you. I'm sorry.
I take this, George. Thank you, George. I'll grab it.